Another day is here, and you're ready for it. What to wear? Check. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Check. Planning for what's next and how to save for it? That's where Bank of America can help. For your financial to-dos, Bank of America has experts ready to help get you closer to your goals. Get started at one of our local financial centers or 24/7 in our mobile banking app. Find a location near you at bankofamerica.com/talktous. What would you like the power to do? Mobile banking requires downloading the app and is only available for select devices. Message and data rates may apply. Bank of America N.A., member FDIC.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Now's the time to save 30% on wedding jewelry, only on BlueNile.com. Make sure your wedding ring is the one, with your pick of diamond and lab-grown diamond bands, all hand-finished and graded for excellence. Or surprise her with something blue she'll love for life, like a stunning pair of sapphire earrings. Blue Nile's jewelry experts are available 24/7 to help, from fit questions to style advice. Right now, get up to 30% off at BlueNile.com. BlueNile.com.
Salah. Escape Cancelo. Oh, it's brilliant from Mo Salah. And still, Salah. Oh, sensational! Son had a go and still abused it.
Oh, what a strike from Yuri Tielemans. De Bruyne.
And it is what Martinelli, gorgeous. Still going up. Oh, he's done it again.
And City
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, EPL Index proudly brings to you the best prediction podcast in the world, A Tad Predictable, with your host, Tadiwa Chankira.
And we're back. Welcome to another episode of A Tad Predictable, the post-season edition. We are currently continuing our post-season series that we started, where we are doing effectively a Cliff Notes type series, where we'll be looking at each of the teams in the new year of the Premier League. So this season coming up, the 24-25 season, we'll look at how their season ended. We'll look at their aims for next season and what it is they need to do in this summer window in order to achieve their goals. One of the teams I was most excited to do this series about, and part of the reason this series was formulated and the idea was sort of put on the whiteboard within the A Tad Predictable staff team room, was a team like Crystal Palace, who could be quite cash rich at some point during this transfer window if some of the rumors are true with regards to some of the sales that they might make. And then, I mean, it just opens up a plethora of opportunities for them and different scenarios of what they could do with all of that money that they do bring in. But before we dive into Crystal Palace, and obviously this episode is focusing on Crystal Palace and everything that involves them during this off-season, let's sort of dial back a little bit. We know the Euros have started. We've sort of seen the first round of fixtures when it comes to the Euros. We're starting to get a picture, if I can say, of how everyone's doing. Germany, obviously 2 wins in 2 games. They're looking strong. Switzerland, again, Xherdan Shaqiri showing up in an international tournament. Obviously, Scotland will feel that they had a chance to go and win the game against them last time out, but they will then have to go to the final day, and obviously it's still in their hands. I guess one of the surprise good teams, obviously Spain are a strong team, usually one of the favorites, but there was hesitation, especially up front with regards to them, but they were quite emphatic with their first game, so we'll see how their second game pans out, but they look really, really strong. England, obviously, at time of recording, just to break that fourth wall, they play later on, so we haven't seen the England game yet, and maybe I'll touch on England in a bit, but yeah, I'll leave that for now. And then we've seen some shaky starts, maybe perhaps from the likes of Netherlands and France, some of the other teams that are usually perennial contenders. or at least thought about as perennial contenders by, the pundits. Belgium, disappointing, shocking result, arguably the biggest shock in terms of where the teams were ranked before they played each other. Obviously, Belgium had those goals ruled out for them, but it really would be a sad end to what many have seen to be a very disappointing golden generation. They were touted as the golden generation for a couple of years now, and it seems to be sort of dying down in a really poor fashion. So hopefully they can fix things for their sake. And then obviously Portugal in that group F. I think they've got a lot of talented players, just putting it all together. But yeah, let's focus on and zero in on England, because obviously we are an English Premier League podcast. With regards to them, I mean, this is probably the least confident I've seen just the nation in general. This is both football fans and, just the general public in terms of confidence in the team. And in previous tournaments recently, we've been quite bullish with how well we think the team's going to be, and trying to pretend like there aren't any holes in the team and focusing on the positives. But this time there seems to be an emphasis to highlight those issues that the team might have in terms of holes. Obviously, we know the left back situation with the fitness issues that England have when it comes to left back. Both players that are not in the squad, and some of them not in the squad because of the fitness issues, and those that are in the squad that aren't fit yet. So there is obviously a few issues with regards to that left back situation. In terms of defense, I'm shocked Tomori didn't make the team, but in terms of what they have, I think Stones and Gay could be enough to see them through the tournament. In terms of right back, they've got an abundance of options there, even with the injuries that they do have. So much so that some of the right backs are having to deputize on the left-hand side. So yeah, right back, I don't think is an issue for me. I think the big thing for England as well is we know Declan Rice is going to start in midfield. Who partners him? We saw Trent Alexander-Arnold do it in the opening day, and whether or not he was successful, I guess that's up to your interpretation. I get playing Trent in games where you're playing a team that's going to be sitting back. Maybe you don't want him playing with Declan Rice there in games with maybe more attacking and more bullish teams. And the reason I say that is because it would probably require Declan Rice to do a lot more defensive work and be a lot more restrained than we want him to be and than we need him to be as England. I think that, yes, but in those games where, look, England should be dominant, England should be creating a lot of chances, the other team is going to be keeping things narrow and tight. I'm more than happy to have Trent in midfield there, because he's one of those players that can unlock a defense with his passing abilities and can stretch the field as well with his passing abilities, switching play from left to right as is needed. So I'm all on board. Obviously, then we've got his deliveries from set pieces. Obviously, if Trippier's playing as well, we've got those. But I'd favor Trent in that department. So yeah, I'm okay with Trent playing there. I found it interesting when Fabregas was a pundit. He was of that sort of Spanish tradition of let's focus on his positives. And highlight those, whereas obviously the English pundits were, as is very famous with the English pundits when it comes to Trent Alexander-Arnold, is let's focus on all of his defensive issues. But the Spanish approach is, well, look at the net positive. Okay, we know he has defensive issues, but he's going to win us more games than he's going to cost us games, based on how much output he has going forward, opposed to maybe some of the risks and shortfalls he has defensively. You're willing to die on those. If Trent costs you a goal or two here because of, poor defensive play or poor positioning, whatever, I'm willing to live with that, because I know he's going to help me create way more chances going forward that we can capitalize on. And when you've got the likes of Harry Kane up front, you bag that you're going to get more goals than the other team, I guess is the Spanish approach to it. The English approach is, Trent can't defend, even though, ironically, whenever his numbers defensively are better than some of the right backs that are compared to him, that never gets brought up. But yeah, I think the Trent issue is one we will dive into. I don't know if it's an issue, but the Trent situation is one we'll dive into when we go into that Liverpool-focused podcast. But yeah, I thought I'll just share my thoughts on it. As I said, I think defensively, centre-back-wise, I think England are fine for this tournament. They should be able to get by. Goalkeeper, some of you may know I have my issues with Pickford. I think his positioning is poor. If you look at the amount of TV dives he has to make, a lot of that has to do with him being in a poor position to start off with, needing him to do these, stretching saves when if he was just, standing a yard or two to the other side, he could have caught the ball. And he's just too theatrical for my liking, and unnecessarily theatrical is my issue with him. And because it's ingrained in his game to be so theatrical, it ends up costing him at times, because then when he's in those poor positions and he does try and stretch to get to a ball and he can't get there and it goes in, you could have been in a better position, opposed to the default setting that he does, that he'll end up getting there with his TV dives, as I like to call them. But so he's my big, from a defensive perspective. I think left back, England can finagle their way through the tournament, whether it is a Trippier playing there, or hoping that a Shaw comes back if he ever does come back, or potentially putting someone else in there to deputize that could potentially make an impact. I know, obviously, in terms of who could be one of those players that comes in there. There's been murmurs of, do we play Saka there? We know he's played there in the past for Arsenal, but I don't think you want to take away his attacking threat. I'll put Joe Gomez there personally. Maybe it's a Liverpool bias, but I think he played phenomenally well for Liverpool throughout the season. So well that it earned him a place back in the England squad after he had been away from the England squad for quite a few years now. He played so well at left back when Liverpool had that left back crisis. I think that's who I would play. And part of the reasoning in that is he can maybe sit deeper, and then when we're playing in an attacking phase, you could have Joe Gomez, Stones and Gahey sort of sitting back as a 3, with then the right back pushing a bit forward with a bit more license to go forward, opposed to what I assume England are doing at the moment, where Walker kind of hovers a bit deeper because of his pace in behind. He's able to sit in that back 3 somewhat. I would shift it, bring Gomez in, and then you've got sort of Walker bombing forward with Saka cutting in. I think that is a dangerous combination. Or if you want to put Trent there at right back, if need be, if he's not playing in midfield, that's always an option as well. And again, Trippier can play there as well too. So yeah, that's what I'll be doing. Bring Joe Gomez in. He should be starting at left back if we can't have Luke Shaw in there, and sort of invert the team that way, so that he's the more defensive of the fullbacks. Let the right side of fullback go forward. In games where England need to break down a team, I would play Trent in midfield with Declan Rice. In games where maybe you need a bit more stability in midfield, I have trepidations with throwing Kobe Mainoo in there this early and expecting him to perform at a high level. I think if you throw in a guy that young and inexperienced, we have to be willing to, similar with the Trent, where if you play him at right back, you have to be willing to, accept that there may be times where he costs you goals, but the net positive, you're happy with that. Would we be happy with the net positive from a Mainoo perspective, in terms of he's young, he's inexperienced, he's going to be playing international football against really experienced players, most likely in midfield. The mistakes he makes in midfield at times, if he does end up making mistakes, are we willing to live with those? I wouldn't mind an Adam Wharton in midfield there if we're going to go with one of the younger ones, but obviously Kobe Mainoo playing for a bigger team seems to have a bigger limelight and be ahead of Wharton in the pecking order. But, fair play to him. And again, Wharton also, it's an experience issue. But pick and choose your poison in that perspective. Then you're starting to look at the likes of Conor Gallagher. Again, he's more of the advanced attacking midfielders. this is the issue for England at the moment. I don't think they have that screen player for the defense, someone that can play as the defensive midfielder and just screen in front of them and protect them whilst all the attacking talent goes forward. And if we're playing Declan Rice in that position, as I said, it's limiting what we want from Declan Rice. You want him bombing forward and coming back. We want that box-to-box type of situation for him. But yeah, maybe it ends up being that Declan Rice has to take one for the team and sit a little bit deeper, and that ends up being the case. But yeah, that's left back and defensive midfielder is the glaring holes for England. The rest of the team, I think, is foolproof. You've got Jude Bellingham, one of the best players in the world at the moment, not just in terms, and you look at the comparisons between him and the likes of Musiala, etc. like that. For me, Bellingham's football IQ is ridiculously higher than some of these other players that he's being compared to. And it goes into him knowing what he needs to do in order to get the job done. Sometimes Bellingham needs to be the person that plays on the ball, sets the tempo for the team, drives forward with the ball. Sometimes he needs to be the player that plays off the ball, be defensively sound, look to make runs in behind, and be the option for the pass for players. Or sometimes he needs to be the goal scorer, drive into the box, get the goal. And he adjusts his game accordingly. He can play all of those different roles, and he can play them all to a high level. And the difference between him and some of the other players that he's getting compared to at the moment is he knows when to switch on with which mode that he wants to play in. And that's ridiculously hard to do for some players. Some players don't even, they just have one mode and that's how they play. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and they end up being marked out of a game or something. He can adapt his game. And in international football, during a game, you do need a player like that who understands when he needs to adapt his game within the tactical parameters of the team. So for me, I don't think there's a debate on who plays the 10. I think he just starts and continue with that. Obviously, then you've got the Saka, Foden's out wide. I think Saka's a guaranteed starter, in my opinion, on that side. It's really the left-hand side. Do you want a Foden there? Do you want an Anthony Gordon to stretch play a bit more there? You do want a Cole Palmer to come and play on the left, even though he maybe would be better suited to the right-hand side. These are the decisions where I think you just go by the game, and then obviously Kane plays up front, and you bring in players in to replace him, and as and when is needed. I wouldn't mind putting Eze on the left and just seeing what an Eze, Bellingham, Saka front, front three behind a Kane would look like. I think that could be quite spicy. But yeah, Foden, obviously he did well for Man City last season. It's hard to take the jersey off of him. But yeah, overall, I think England have a really good chance. Ironically, these previous tournaments when people have been very bullish about England's chances of winning and it's coming home and all of that, I've always been the one that's been like, guys, we don't, it's not quite there for England at the moment. I don't think they're going to. Whereas it seems to have flipped this time around. Most people are cautious when it comes to predicting how well England are going to do in this tournament. I've been saying, hey, I think this is the tournament for England to go and win it. Again, defensively, I've mentioned those issues. Defensive midfield is a big one for me. But I do think England have enough goals in their squad. I do think their style of play is going to suit some of the other teams, the bigger teams that they're going to be playing, in that they're going to probably play a lot more of a counter-attacking football, and Jude Bellingham is going to be really key. I think he's the difference for England in the previous tournaments and England now, and him coming into this tournament with the form that he has. And I hope Gareth Southgate is a bit more brave when it comes to utilizing a Trent Alexander-Arnold, even in games where, you're chasing a goal and you want to still keep it tight. Just rather go to lose 2-0 than lose 1-0. In my opinion, especially in a knockout tournament. Like, if you're going out, you're going out. Go out on your shield type of thing. Go out swinging. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the England situation. Let's dive in to Crystal Palace and what we could look forward to them heading into next season. Obviously, we start with what they did last season. Massive season for Crystal Palace. They were not doing too well in the league. if we can say that, if we can be polite in how we phrase that. I mean, looking at where they started off, you kicked the season off with a win against Sheffield United, that 1-0 win. They were in 5th place because of that. And as I said, it's the first time in the season. Then, throughout the rest of the season, they start to get a bit shaky. No back-to-back wins for a while before, obviously, the managerial change that we'll talk about in a little bit. But I do think it was one season too much from a Crystal Palace in terms of what they were trying to do, and I assumed that Roy Hodgson was going to step down a lot sooner than he did. And obviously only on the 19th of Feb was Glasner appointed. But I thought heading into the start of last season, I'm not sure Roy should have been the man. In my opinion, I thought they should have figured out a way to be able to bring in his replacement at that point in time, and then and then go into last season with a fresh manager, give them enough time in preseason. I know Roy only came in March of 2023, but I thought it was just to see out the season, just steady the ship, see out the season. We'll bring in our next manager. I was very harsh when Patrick Vieira got fired, because I thought Crystal Palace should have given them just a bit more time. I thought they would be fine in terms of staying up with Patrick Vieira. In my opinion, he was very unfortunate with the amount of injuries that he had. And I thought just when a lot of the key players were starting to come back, that's when they fired him. And it was a bit unfair. The fixture list as well was ridiculous during that period before he got fired. The fixture list was starting to ease. Some players were starting to come back. I thought he was going to be able to turn it around. And I was a bit annoyed that they didn't allow him that chance. But I understand even if you're doubting, that the manager can keep you in the Premier League, if you're a Crystal Palace, you probably have to then make that move and pull the plug on him. And that's probably what they did, just to, safeguard their position in the Premier League. But once they did that, I assumed Roy Hodgson was going to be given a very big thank you but amicably ushered out of the club, and a new manager would have been brought in. But alas, in July, they sort of agreed that Roy would be staying, and to me, that just doomed the season for Crystal Palace going into the next season. And as I said, you look at what they then went on to do that season, no back-to-back wins until about, game week 33 even. So it even took a while once Glasner came in for him to have an influence on the team. But once he had that influence, they went on that unbeaten run to end the season, which was pretty cool. I think they went 7 games unbeaten with 1 draw in the middle there. So yeah, he looked really exciting when he eventually had the team sort of bedded in and playing his style of football. So we're going to be interested to see what he can do with an entire preseason. For his sake, hopefully a lot of his players come back early, but we know with the Euros, we know with the Olympics, some players might come, but he might only have 2 weeks with certain players. So that is going to be interesting. But hopefully the bulk of the squad come back. He's got a full preseason to now embed what he has already sort of, the foundations that he had set in place at the back end of last season. But overall, in terms of all of their competitions, they end up finishing 10th in the Premier League. That run of 7 games at the end really boosted them up the Premier League quite quickly. Ended up on 49 points there, just behind West Ham, who were on 52 points. And they finished above Brighton, who were on 48. Bournemouth were on 38 points as well. I think overall, phenomenal season, taking into account what had transpired, a manager being sacked, a couple of niggly injuries as well for some key players throughout the season. I think 10th is really good. And makes for a very exciting summer heading forward. We'll dive into that a bit more in a bit more detail later on in the podcast. But let's move on to the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup. Obviously, both of those, Roy Hodgson was still in charge. FA Cup, they go out in the third round. Carabao Cup, they go out in the third round. Obviously, Carabao Cup, they entered it in the second round. And in the second round, they beat Plymouth 4-2, and then they had Man United to face, where they lost 3-2 to them. In the FA Cup, they also had Premier League opposition, unfortunately for them. It was Everton. They had the 0-0 draw at Selhurst Park, and then they had to travel to Goodison Park, where they lost 1-0 there. So definitely disappointed that they were knocked down so early into the cup competitions. But considering, the context of how the season was transpiring, all focus should have been on just getting things right again in the Premier League. And that's effectively what happened. And getting out of the cup tournaments, I think, helped. That's just stabilized that situation. It allows you more time to train on the pitch, and it probably helped Glasner when he did come in to have some of those weeks where he could then have, those, I don't know what I believe the term is, +4 or -4, depending on how you plan your training, sort of days in training where they could really implement tactical, situations. And you could even stretch a preseason into that kind of situation, but that's more for earlier in the season. But I think it allowed him and offered him more time to really embed what he wanted the team to do. And we saw the benefit of that later on in the season, as we mentioned. So overall, okay, I think once the season got off to a bad start, it was just, okay, let's stay in the Premier League and we'll go again next season. Let's identify who our manager is that we want long-term, and let's make sure that we've got them in place for next season. And obviously, I think it ends up then working well from that perspective, because Glasner comes in, he gets, obviously, from middle of Feb all the way through the end of the season to work with the players, start to implement his system, identify which players work, which players don't. So he's not coming in fresh, like an Arnie Slot, for example, who's coming in cold, so to speak, into preseason, not having worked with any of the players. Glasner will have an idea of what Palace is like. He'll be comfortable, probably would have settled in, bought his house, gotten all of that stuff sorted out, which obviously gets overlooked at times. And he would then be in a place to just focus on the football, focus on the transfer targets that they probably would have identified during the spell whilst he was working at Crystal Palace in his role as a manager. So yeah, I think overall it ended up being the perfect situation. Manager can hit the ground running in the summer, and they seem to have hit the ground running in terms of signings, because they've already made a couple, one of which is soon to be announced, but by all accounts is agreed as well. So yeah, it looks like they are in a really good position from that perspective, but there is that cloud hanging over what could be an exciting season next season for Palace, because we know a couple of their players are garnering interest from some other teams, not just in the Premier League, but abroad as well. So let's initially look at what's happened in terms of the players that have left, and then we can sort of dive into the meat of the transfer window and what could happen. We know the likes of, so Tompkins has left, his contract was up. Jario Riedewald has left, his contract was up as well. I think Tompkins, it was time. He's been really good for Crystal Palace, and when he was a key player for them, he was really important, but it was time to phase him out. I think the club is heading in a new direction and are in a comfortable enough position for him to depart with all their best wishes. I'm low-key surprised that Ward wasn't in that same bracket. He's signed a brand new contract, but I thought maybe he might be ushered out, or Nathaniel Klein might be ushered out as well. But Ward and Klein get new contracts, so they're staying. As I mentioned, Jario Riedveld, it just unfortunately didn't click for him at Crystal Palace. So he's left on a free transfer, as well as Nathan Ferguson, who unfortunately for him had a plethora of injuries, really bad injuries throughout his career. He obviously came in infamously from West Brom and the controversial transfer there, but it just didn't work out for him. So he's ended up leaving the club, and hopefully the injuries, he can sort that out and find a club and rejuvenate his career. That would be really nice for him. So yeah, so those three have gone out. Their contracts have expired. I mentioned a couple of the players whose contracts were also going to be expiring, but ended up renewing their contracts. Nathaniel Klein, he gets a new contract. So does Ward. He also gets a new contract, as well as their third choice goalkeeper, Remy Matthews. That was hovering over a couple of days, if not a week or so, where they did offer it to him and he was mulling over whether he would stay. But yeah, he's decided to stay. So those three players end up staying, which I guess from that perspective helps with continuity. Maybe one or two of them are part of the leadership group within the club, and it will be good for them to stay in and around the team. I mean, Nathaniel Klein played an awful lot of football for a guy who seems to have keeps extending his career. Every time I think he's on the way out, he seems to just continue to be important and make himself valuable to the team, and ends up staying for another season, as I mentioned. But also, it's important to note that Nathaniel Klein is an academy graduate at Palace. So is Remy Matthews. So that probably helps with those sort of situations when you're registering your squads. So maybe that plays a factor as well in terms of keeping them on board. So yeah, so they stay, which is good from that perspective. In terms of signings, I mentioned that they've made some signings, relatively early. One of which has one of which has been announced. The other, it's sort of pending an announcement, but it seems by all accounts to have been done already. But we will get to those after the ad break, because I do want to just sort of really dive into everything that involves their transfer situation this summer, because it's going to be really, really interesting from my perspective and could go in a number of ways. But guys, while I have you, do go check out Liberty Shield. This podcast is presented by EPLindex.com in association with Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider. You can check out their services at libertyshield.com. If you use the coupon code EPL25, you'll get 25% off of either the software, VPN, or the routers that get delivered to you as well. As I'm speaking, I've just seen a goal go in for Serbia, and a last minute goal, literally the last kick of the ball, it seems like. So that's 1-1 in that game. I'm sure you guys would have seen that scoreline by now. Interesting stuff. Liberty Shield is a great VPN service. It's really easy to install, easy to use, and has a whole host of fixed features. It can be installed on multiple devices, which is cool. Guys, I think the big thing for me is protecting your online data, and Liberty Shield ensures that you do that. It also has things like unlocking geo-locked content, which is very, very cool. As I said, go check out their services at libertyshield.com, and we thank them for sponsoring the show. But I'll leave you guys to think about sort of what you would do with Crystal Palace in the summer window, and then we will come back after the short break and we will see whether or not I've done similar things or the same thing as what you guys would have done. So we will be right back after this short break. All right, we are back. We're talking Crystal Palace, one of the exciting teams heading into this off-season, and could be an exciting team heading into next season. I'm saying that because they ended the season on that 7-game unbeaten run there, and that's huge thanks to the new manager that they brought in, Oliver Glasner. Now, Oliver Glasner, he came from Eintracht Frankfurt and Wolfsburg before that. Comes into Crystal Palace, brings in this, it's sort of like a 3-4-2-1 formation that he's brought in, which I think has worked really well for Crystal Palace. And we will see if he can continue this momentum heading into next season. But they're going to make things a lot more difficult for him, because I don't know if he can hang on to all the players that he would be hoping to hang on to in order to create what could be an exciting season. Look, I will preface everything I'm going to say going forward with this. I sincerely hope, for the good of football, that Crystal Palace are able to keep Michael Olise, Eberechi Eze, and Mark Gahey. I really, really hope that they can keep all three, and we can see what this team can really do next season with them, plus a couple of additions to strengthen and bolster the squad with an informed Mateta. Like I want nothing more for Crystal Palace than for them to be able to keep all of those players. And it seems like Palace are trying. They're not just going to lie down and let these players leave. Obviously they're going to get compensated for these players if they do leave, because they've got contracts and they've got release clauses and all of that. So it will also have implications from a financial perspective, because the money that would be coming in if those release clauses are activated, a lot more is coming in initially, opposed to maybe installments if it was just a regular sale. But I mentioned that because we've heard, and it's become public now, that Crystal Palace are still talking to Michael Olise. They're trying to convince him to stay. He's one that's been targeted by a whole host of clubs. Chelsea have probably been the biggest talked about in terms of interest in him. They want a right winger. Newcastle have been inquiring about him. We know that Bayern Munich have also inquired about Michael Olise. Liverpool, there have been rumours about them looking to bring him in as well. So Man United, another team that's looking for another right winger. It just seems like he could be the talk of the summer in terms of whether or not he goes or stays. And if it does drag out, we know he's going to the Olympics as well. So does it drag out beyond the Olympics? Is it a situation where he's saying, I'm sorting out my future either before the Olympics or after, not during? So if it ends up being a situation where no decision has been made when we get to the Olympics, maybe it ends up dragging on to late into the transfer window. But yeah, he's probably the big one in terms of, could they keep him? They're talking to him. They're desperately trying to keep him. They're hoping to give him a new contract with a release clause for next season. They've said to him, look, we're going to be ambitious. Early indications is he has been impressed with how ambitious they have been, or at least the plans that they have. But whether or not that's going to be enough to convince him to stay, we will wait and see. Another one I mentioned was Eberechi Eze. I think obviously him being in the England squad, I mentioned earlier on that I would like him to start at left wing just to see what he could do there. He was one of the informed players coming into this off-season. If he has a really good tournament, you'd imagine interest in him will also increase. But we know Tottenham have inquired about him. They're the club leading the race to try and sign him. By all accounts, he's got some good mates there at Tottenham. He wouldn't mind going to Tottenham, but I don't think he's going to rock the boat in order to go there. And then obviously he's represented by CAA base. They're a good group of people. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him and whether or not he does end up going to Tottenham, if it is a situation where he's leaving the club, or if he stays for another season. Let's say him and Olise and Guehi talk, and it's like, let's bring the band back for one more trip around the globe in terms of a Premier League calendar, and let's go and see how high we can take Crystal Palace in the Premier League. That is what I'm hoping for, as I've mentioned. Guehi, obviously starting for England, he's going to be in the spotlight during the Euros. We'll see how he handles that situation. Obviously, a lot of talk with Guehi was that he played a lot of football under a Roy Hodgson team that played maybe a bit more without him being required to utilize the ball carrying skills that many of the teams that would be interested in him would want to see. So again, to be interesting to see for England if he does get that responsibility on the ball, and if that sways, some of the teams that are interested in him and have maybe paused a bit when it comes to that, because they're not quite sure what they're going to get completely from him from the confidence on the ball perspective. But I think he's perfectly fine on the ball. I think he could be a really good player for someone to pick up. But we will see if he can stay or if he goes. So in terms of those players, in terms of what we're doing on this podcast, just so we can give you an idea of what Crystal Palace could be doing, and, our cheap plug here, go and check out @Predictable on Twitter. We will have the still shots of what we've done with this Crystal Palace side, and the transfers that we brought in, the transfers that the players we transferred out, and how the team will be heading into next season. So for this podcast, for this iteration of things, we have unfortunately lost all three of those players. So because we wanted to show you what could they do if they ended up losing all three. That is Eberechi Eze, Michael Olise, and Mark Gahey. If all three of them get sold, what can Crystal Palace do to rejuvenate the squad, bolster the squad, add some depth as well, and head into next season with as much promise as they ended last season? Now, as I prefaced, my hope is that doesn't happen. Most likely situation is maybe one or two of them leave, not all three. Maybe an Olise gives them one more season. We know he had a bit of injury issues. Maybe he wants another season just to bed in, and maybe, we've seen him reject Chelsea before last season, which is what led to his new contract and the new release clause. So it's in the realm of possibility. He's shown he's willing to stay at Palace. Maybe he's willing another season. I don't think there's a reason for him to rush if he doesn't feel the move is right for him. He's still 22 years of age. One of the really, really ridiculously talented youngsters that has the world at his feet, in my opinion. So we'll see which one of them stay. Maybe again a Mark Gahey, as I mentioned. Maybe some teams will want to see him play another season with a Glasner style of football, which asks him to do a lot more on the ball. Maybe that will be the situation, and then he goes. They come in for him in the next season. Eze probably is the one for me, even though Olise is the one most spoken about. Eze to Tottenham seems like a move that everyone is going to is okay with, in terms of Spurs are probably going to have to pay close to 60 million for him. Crystal Palace will obviously take the money and then look to reinvest it. But yeah, in terms of our stuff, as I mentioned, we unfortunately had to sell all three. The board took the money, but they gave it back to us, and we did some stuff with it, which was quite interesting. So let's head on to sort of assess what else would be happening for the team in terms of players that have come in already, though. I teased them earlier in the podcast. A replacement potentially for Gahey, or just squad depth, has already come in Chadi Rihad. He comes in from Real Betis. Obviously, Palace signed him for 12 million plus 2 million in add-ons. So we brought him in into the team already. So that's good news for them. Nice left-footed centre-back, which was something that they needed. A player that can play sort of that wide centre-back role, so on that left hand of the three. And I'll go into sort of the style of play, the formation that they'll be playing after I've discussed the two players that are coming in. Well, at least one confirmed, one that is rumoured, but all but confirmed to be coming in. So he comes in as I said, either a replacement for Gahey or a squad depth. They did need a left-footed, left-sided centre-back, in my opinion. The other person that is rumoured to be coming in, by all accounts is coming in, is Daichi Kamada. He obviously joins back up with Oliver Glasner, who worked with him at Frankfurt between 2021 and 2023. And in that time, Kamada, I think he scored 22 goals in all competitions. 5 of those came in Europa League, and obviously they won the Europa League in that 21-22 season. So a player that is familiar with the manager. He comes in on a free transfer, attacking midfielder who will be very exciting to play. Is he a replacement for an Eze, or is he squad depth? Again, these questions you have to ask, but he comes in. I think he would be a really fun player for them, and I'm excited to see him get sprinkled in and around the team and see what he can produce for them. But let's dial it back a bit, and before we dive into further signings, what exactly is it that Oliver Glasner is going to be asking them to do? So he's going to be playing that 3-4-2-1 formation. The three centre-backs sit a bit more narrow than maybe some of the other three at the back type of systems that we've seen from other managers. And obviously Anderson, I think, will be the one that would be tasked with coming out with the ball and being a bit more risky, if I can say, or taking more risk with his passing. We know he's got a beautiful passing range. So yeah, Anderson, I'm comfortable in his role with Glasner, and we've obviously seen in the run into the end of the season him bedding into the system quite well. Then we've got those wing backs, very attacking. They give us with lots of crosses coming into the box that we're going to see from them. And then we have two midfielders, one more a defensive midfielder, one a sort of ball-winning midfielder that plays a bit higher up and helps join the attack and bridges the gap between the midfield, the defense, and and the attack, obviously. So in there, you're looking at, a Wharton playing as maybe the defensive midfielder. He's got a decent passing rate, another talented young player that they brought from the championship. We're going to talk about that profile type player a bit later on as well. And then obviously Decore, hoping that he comes back firing for them next season. He'll be key for them. They've obviously got Jefferson Lerma that they've got there as well, who can be the depth for that sort of ball-winning midfielder. Then in attack, they've got that right winger on the right-hand side, inverted winger, which is sort of the Olisi role. And then on the right, you'll see what we've done there is it's a very narrow sitting winger, so almost like an attacking midfielder, which is kind of what Eze is doing for them. And then obviously up front, Mateta's been in red hot form. So yeah, it's a really good system. They don't always, press really high and aggressively. They pick and choose when they press, but they do like to, as I mentioned, keep those centre backs quite narrow, make it compact, and then move forward from there. So how do we then make this work for the team? In terms of, as I mentioned, signings and what they'll be doing, there were rumors. Obviously, I just want to address these ones of, a couple of players from Rapid Vienna, obviously Glasner having ties to his native country there, with those rumors. Leopold Querfeld and Matthias Salt. I don't know the players, if I'm being honest with you, but just one to keep an eye on in terms of, does he go back to his countrymen and sort of try and bring them in? But Palace aren't the only clubs interested in them in terms of the Premier League. Burnley, Fulham and Wolves have been interested in them, as well as Leicester City. So keep an eye on them. As I said, I'm not too familiar with their game. So I'm not going to speak about players that I'm not too familiar with, but I will acknowledge that those have been rumored to be coming in. I mentioned the Eze situation with Tottenham in terms of whether or not he could be leaving. In terms of price, it seems like the price that has been quoted is 60 million with 8 million in add-ons is what has been quoted to Tottenham, and that's in line with his release clause. So that sort of, Tottenham, you just need to pay if you want to pay, or pay up or shut up type of situation, and we'll see whether or not they do that with him. Right. So in terms of if we do end up selling those three players, then we're looking at a situation where alone with just those players, you'd be bringing in about 160 million. Maybe if you're saying 40 million for Guehi, and I'll tell you why Guehi is 40 million, because what we've done is we sold him to Man United. We know that Wan-Bissaka is on the way out of Man United. We're bringing him back home. We know that he's keen to obviously continue playing a lot of football, and he's kind of acknowledged that his time at Man United is coming to an end. Man United could get priced out of the move for Braithwaite if, by all accounts, Everton hold on to the valuation that they have. Man United's opening bid was around 30 to 35 million for Braithwaite, which is nowhere near the 70 million that Everton wants. So 40 million is within Man United's budget, evidently. If I'm Crystal Palace and I do want to sell Guehi, and I think a smart way of selling Guehi would be to a Man United for 40 million and plus Wan-Bissaka. So you get to bring Wan-Bissaka back in. And the reason I like the Wan-Bissaka signing is he can either play as the wing back. Obviously, he's got the flaws going forward, but defensively he would be sound. So maybe in some of the bigger games you play him as the wing back, knowing he's going to be defensively solid. Or you can play him as the right-sided centre-back at times if you want to, because we've seen Nathaniel Klein do that for Crystal Palace towards the end of the season. So he's not afraid to put sort of a traditional right-back in that right centre-back position for the back three. And Wan-Bissaka, we know the defensive side of things is the strong side for him. So I think he would suit that position really well as a depth. So he would end up being a depth piece that could become a starter if he obviously plays himself into form for either the right centre-back position or the wing-back position, depending on the fixture. So that's what we've done with Guehi in terms of that transfer. Let's move on to another player who he's already gone in Kofi Balmer. I know, it's not a household name, but he's gone to Motherwell. So just to get that one out of the way, he's gone as well. Then Eze, we've agreed the deal with Tottenham. They've ended up deciding to pay the 60 million. So Eze is gone to Tottenham. Michael Olise ends up going to Chelsea. We've seen Chelsea be quite bullish with the signings that they do want to make. Obviously, Eze rebuffed them last season. It would be hard for them to see him rebuffing them 2 seasons in a row, and I'm sure they're going to make the financial package for him from a player wages and signing bonus perspective quite inviting, and they end up getting him. But again, it's a sad day because I'm hoping that all 3 of them stay at the club. We've also then sold Odsonne Edouard to Bournemouth for 20 million. He goes there probably as cover for Solanke, or I know they've got another forward that they've brought in that was on loan there, Yunus. But they by all accounts they want another striker on top of that. So we've ended up sending him to Bournemouth for 20 million. That's the asking price, just from a public perspective, that Crystal Palace have given to teams, and Crystal Palace have given to teams. And as I said, Enes Unai, he's gone to Bournemouth. Bournemouth want another striker as well, even if Solanke stays. So I think that seems like an easy deal to make. Edward has always said when he got to Celtic that his dream was to end up in the Premier League. So I think would be hard done by selling him outside of the Premier League. So we looked for a Premier League club, and it's worked out that way from that perspective. Those are the outgoings. Guehi to Man United, Balmer I've mentioned to Motherwell, Eze's gone to Tottenham for 60 million, Michael Olise to Chelsea for 60 million. Interestingly, with the Olise to Chelsea one, similarly to Guehi going to Man United or Wan-Bissaka, there have been discussions, maybe not, it's not materialized into anything concrete yet, of can a Noni Madueke come the other way in a player exchange type of deal. We know Olise's release clause, I believe, is Champions League relevant. So because Chelsea didn't make the Champions League, they're probably going to have to pay above the release clause, because I think 60 million is they could probably get a lot more if it wasn't for that release clause. So I wouldn't be surprised if Palace are asking for a lot more. But maybe a Madueke can come either on loan or as a transfer, as a player plus cash swap deal there. So that's one to keep an eye on, but we haven't done that on this podcast for this episode. So then that leaves quite a few holes. So what do we do in order to address those holes? I've mentioned Wan-Bissaka coming in and what his role will be. Daichi Kamada comes in as a depth piece for that attacking midfield Eze role. We're going to be bringing a starter. Chadi Riyad, as I've mentioned, he comes in as well, already confirmed. He probably comes in and starts at that left centre-back role. As I mentioned, the team really needed a left-footed centre-back to come in, and he comes and slots in quite well there. I've gone big on a centre-back to replace Guehi, and the reason I've done that is because you'll see with the signings that we've made in the attacking positions that we've got a lot more money left over. So if this transfer ends up needing a little bit more money, although I don't think it should, considering Maxence Lacroix has indicated that he wants to leave He's shown an interest in coming in the Premier League. We know he's got the ties with Glasner. Again, we're going for a player that Glasner could probably convince to come to the club because of their relationship. So Maxence Lacroix, welcome to Crystal Palace. He obviously joins the team. Over here, we've said about 27 million to get him. It seems like between 25 to 30 is what they're asking for. Maybe they ask for a bit more when it gets to a bidding war between teams. And again, because we're cash rich, we will be able, I think, to throw our muscle in terms of bringing him into the team. I want to get a really, really talented young centre-back, similar projections to Guehi in terms of talent projections. So we're not really dropping in quality there, which I think will be really important to continue to drive Crystal Palace forward and up the Premier League table. You can tell I'm excited about Crystal Palace and what they could do this coming season with Glasner at the helm. So he comes in sort of as a big signing for centre-back. He obviously come and start in that right centre-back role for us. And obviously Anderson starting in the middle as well. So that's the back three. Riyad, Anderson and Lacroix. They will be ahead of Henderson, who obviously keeps his job in goal. In terms of other transfers that we've done, we now need to look at replacing Eberechi Eze and replacing Michael Olise. And then obviously replacing Edouard in terms of depth piece. Let's start with Edouard as a depth piece. I've gone and got an Eddie Nketiah from Arsenal. His contract's starting to wind down slowly but surely. Obviously, a year or two left, 2 years left in his deal there. So they've got room to negotiate, and they initially were asking for about between 40 to 45 million. That asking price has gone down to about 35. I think it will go down again to closer to 30, especially if Arsenal do reinforce their attack like they're threatening to do in this window. And I don't know why, but Nketiah, in my mind, has always ended up at Crystal Palace. He reminds me of when Lucas Podolski, I always thought he was going to end up at Arsenal, and you can go back and look through the annals of history if you can find the social media content regarding that. I always predicted that he would end up at Arsenal. It just seemed like a perfect fit. I think Nketiah at Crystal Palace seems like a perfect fit, and I think him coming in to rotate / deputize Mateta would be really exciting for Crystal Palace. I think he'll come in with a chip on his shoulder with a point to prove. So he comes in there. Now, replacing Eberechi Eze, I've gone with a bold move in terms of players that I think he's going to get a lot of interest. He's already got a couple of caps for Argentina. Yes, he's playing in the MLS, so maybe people might have a pause when it comes to that. But I think Thiago Almeida needs to come to Europe. I think it would be a perfect landing spot if he comes to Crystal Palace. 21 million to get him on board. Seems like about 25 million euros it would be enough for him. So in and around that mark, 21 million pounds. Bring him in. He wants to come to Europe. He's declared as such. As I said, there are a lot of clubs that are interested in him, a lot of clubs that have been interested in him in the past. I think you bring him in for 21 and he's probably a player you could sell for 50 within a season because he is super talented in that creative attacking midfielder role / inverted or tucked in winger role that Eze has been playing. I think he could be really exciting to fill that role. Some of the players that didn't quite make it in terms of us bringing them in, but were on the short list was like a Smith Rowe. I think he could be quite interesting. Another player in those positions. We had Lazar Samadžić. Obviously there's interest from Juventus and it seems like he may end up at Juventus. So we've sort of pulled away from that one. But yeah, even, if you go to Stuttgart and you get like an Enzo Milo, but we'll send the screenshot out via Twitter in terms of some of the targets that missed out there. But yeah, so Thiago Almeida comes in. I think he's really exciting. To replace Michael Olise, how big do you go? That's the question. You want to get it right, really. You don't want to get it wrong because he's been so creative. He looks like such a talent. We've gone back to Arsenal, so we've gotten Nketiah in. We've gone back to Arsenal and said, hey, Reiss Nelson, we know you guys are willing to sell him. The asking price is 20 million at the moment from Arsenal. I think he deserves a chance in the Premier League to showcase that he is a talent. Every time he comes on for Arsenal, he seems impressive. We know he scored a couple of late goals in recent seasons for them, but I'm curious to see what he can do when he's got a really long stretch of games where he gets to properly bed in and play a lot more football than he has for Arsenal. So I think him coming in as a replacement for Olise. What we've also done is, as you can see, Olise's come in. I mean, Reece Nelson's come in for about 20. Thiago Almeida's come in for 21. Nketiah's come in for 30. Maxis Lacroix's come in for 27. We still got a bit of money. Obviously, Chaddy came in for 12.5. So we still got a bit more money. And I wouldn't be surprised if Crystal Palace continue this thing that they've been doing of going to the Championship, looking at who are the really talented players in the Championship, signing a couple of them. We've seen it with Wharton. We've seen it with Olise. We've seen it with Eze. They just keep signing these really exciting Championship players that then you can resell for really big money if you develop them well. So I had to look around the Championship to see what players could potentially be brought in by Crystal Palace. In terms of, who are the young talents within the Championship. So we've got, the likes of a Ronnie Edwards, if you want to bring in centre-back depth. I thought about Ronnie Edwards, but that's when we decided to go big with the Maxence Lacroix and put him straight into the starting lineup. But a Ronnie Edwards, who Crystal Palace have tried to sign twice before, and have been been priced out of buying him. But we know Peterborough, he's got 1 year left on his contract. The gamble didn't work for them from their perspective, and trying to obviously get promoted and do all of that stuff in order to maximize keeping him and pricing him out of a move. So he's got 1 year left on his contract. He's not re-signing by all accounts. Could probably then go back for about the 9 million, 8 million to sign him. The reason they keep pricing teams out is because there's a hefty buyback clause. Sell-on clause with his previous club. So that's the issue for Peterborough, is basically they don't want to pay Barnett's sell-on clause. It's closer to 50% of the sale or something ridiculous like that. So they're trying to maximize how much they can get for him. But yeah, maybe you can go back and get a Ronnie Edwards. Mosquera, if it wasn't for his injury issues with Valencia, is another one that you could probably go and get in terms of centre-back talent. He's not in the Championship, but I did want to throw his name out. Going back to the Championship, Hayden Hackney, another talented midfielder in the Championship that you could probably go and get from Middlesbrough. Again, if you want to bolster that midfield, it probably won't cost too much for him. So that would be another name that I would be looking at getting if we want to go down that road. Another midfielder, talented, George Hall from Birmingham. That's one to keep an eye on. And then there's a kid at Sunderland. What's his name? Chris Rigg. Thank you. Got that in my ear. Chris Rigg from Sunderland. He's still very, very young, 16, if I'm not mistaken at the moment. But you could go get him and just develop him in your academy. And then, because we're so catch rich from the sales that we've made, you can go and bully and sign some of these players, stash them in your academy, or develop them in your first team, or whatever your bridging is between the first team and the academy, and then bring them into the team, sell them off for a profit. And that's a better way to spend the cash reserves left, opposed to going and signing. Because I know maybe people might say Reece Nelson is not, as impressive as they were thinking with all the money that you've gotten for Olise. Maybe go and spend that 60 million that you got on a 60 million player. But I think the smarter thing is to spread that money a little bit. Some of it in the youth academy, because those players are going to come good if we develop them right. And by all accounts, Crystal Palace have done that really well with the likes of Eze and Olise. So that's the thinking behind going and getting a Reece Nelson. But what I would also go and do is go and sign, and we have signed on this iteration, a young winger as well that can develop underneath Reece Nelson. Just in case Reece Nelson, it doesn't work out, he's got a young, hungry guy snapping at his heels. Jonathan Rowe from Norwich obviously had a really exciting season. He's slowly been bubbling in terms of anticipation and what he can deliver. And it seems like last season was a really strong season for him. So we actually went and did sign him from Norwich. And I think he would be a talented player to just bring in, along with, he adds a depth to that forward line. 12 million for him is the asking price. from Norwich. So that is a really cool deal that we were able to do as well. But yeah, what would you guys do with all that money for Crystal Palace? Do you like the approach that we've gone with, or would you go with something different? Maybe spend a bit more on bigger name players and forget about adding to the academy. Let us know on at Tad Predictable. Do tweet at us. Let us know. But yeah, that's kind of what we've done with Crystal Palace. I don't think I've forgotten anyone. In terms of players that have come in, as I've mentioned, we've got Chadi Riyad has come in. We've got Daichi Kamada, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Reece Nelson, Thiago Almeida, Eddie Nketiah, Maxence Lacroix, Jonathan Rowe from Norwich as well comes in. And hopefully for Palace, that will be enough to continue their pursuit to finish in the top half of the Premier League. As I said, I'll end the podcast how I started it in terms of my conversations with those three players. I sense that they're able to keep them. Sincerely hope that they're able to keep them. But yeah, that's going to do it for another episode of A Tad Predictable. From my end, guys, go and check out all of the content on EPLindex.com. There's all the transfer news, all the Euro news, if you want to keep up with that you could ever wish for. Go and check out the Two Footer podcast, which is daily with Dave Hendrick. He discusses the hottest topics in football. Go subscribe to EPL Index on your podcast providers. Give us 5 stars, write positive comments. That stuff really does help us out. Go follow at EPL Index on Twitter. Go follow at A Tad Predictable on Twitter. I've been Tadiwa Chankira. You can find me on my Twitter handle at Tad Predicts. A huge thank you to Obi Semenya. He's at John Empire SA. And Jody, she's at Spursy141 for our guest intros. Our producer behind the glass, Mr. Guy Drinkle. He's at Guy Drinkle on Twitter. From Guy, from the team, from myself, remember, Chisingaperi, Chimushura.
And still, Salah, sensational! Son had a go and scored a beauty!
Oh, what a strike from Yuri Tielemans! De Bruyne!
And it is Wood from Martinelli, gorgeous! Still going up! Oh, he's done it again!
And City have won the Premier League!
Sports Social Podcast Network.